In late October 2003, emergency rooms across Pennsylvania started seeing an unusually high number of patients with the same symptoms: fever, extreme fatigue, muscle aches, nausea, and then something more visible: dark urine and a yellowish tint spreading across the skin. They were teenagers, parents, grandparents, people who didn't know each other and didn't live in the same neighborhood. It didn't seem to make sense that so many similar cases would show up at once, in a region that rarely saw more than a handful of isolated cases in a year. But when doctors started asking each patient what they'd done in the past few weeks, a pattern emerged. Almost all of them had eaten at the same place: a popular Mexican restaurant inside a local mall, the Chi-Chi's at Beaver Valley Mall. Before we get into how an entire restaurant became the center of one of the largest hepatitis A outbreaks ever recorded in the United States, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, because there's a lot more real investigations like this one coming. Chi-Chi's was a popular Mexican restaurant chain in the United States throughout the 1980s, 90s, and early 2000s, the kind of family-friendly mall spot where whole families would go for a Saturday night dinner. The location in question sat inside Beaver Valley Mall in Monaca, Pennsylvania, about 25 miles northwest of Pittsburgh. It was a busy restaurant with a steady flow of customers and a menu full of shared plates, sauces, melted cheese dips, and sides that got passed from table to table. Through late September and into October of that year, without anyone noticing, something entering that restaurant's kitchen was already contaminating meal after meal served to thousands of people. The problem is that hepatitis A symptoms don't show up right away. The virus can take anywhere from 2 weeks to a month to manifest, which meant that by the time the first patients started seeking medical help, the restaurant had already served weeks of contaminated meals to thousands of unsuspecting customers, many of whom couldn't even remember exactly what they'd eaten. The Pennsylvania Department of Health issued an official advisory on November 3, 2003, linking the hepatitis A cases to the restaurant at Beaver Valley Mall. From there, the situation escalated at an alarming speed. By November 7, there were already 130 confirmed cases. 4 days later, on November 11th, that number had nearly doubled to 240. By November 14, cases had surpassed 500, and 3 people had already died from liver failure caused by the disease. Faced with the scale of the problem, health officials set up emergency vaccination clinics, offering immune globulin shots to anyone who had eaten at the restaurant in the preceding weeks, trying to contain the virus before more people got sick. In the end, more than 9,000 people would pass through those clinics seeking protection. Meanwhile, investigators from Pennsylvania, the CDC, and the FDA raced against time to figure out exactly which item, out of an entire menu full of shared dishes and ingredients, was actually responsible for spreading the virus so effectively. The first obvious suspicion fell on the restaurant's own staff. After all, hepatitis A can spread through direct contact, and 13 Chi-Chi's employees had also gotten sick. But that theory fell apart quickly. All of those employees only started showing symptoms after October 26, which meant they had been infected, not the other way around. Someone, or something, was already spreading the virus before that, through the food itself. To figure out what, investigators turned to a classic epidemiological tool, the case control study. They interviewed 181 people who had eaten at the restaurant between October 3 and 6, and later got sick, and compared them to another 83 people who had also eaten there during the same period but never got ill. The question was simple: what did the first group eat that the second group didn't? Cross-referencing item by item on the menu, a specific pattern began to stand out between the two groups, pointing not to an entire dish, but to a single ingredient that kept showing up in the meals eaten by the people who got sick. The numbers from the case control study were telling. 94% of the people who got sick had eaten the restaurant's mild salsa, compared to just 39% of the people who didn't. The chili con queso, another menu item, showed up in 15% of sick patients versus only 3% of healthy ones. The hot salsa, a spicier version, wasn't linked to a single case. The difference between the two salsas was simple. The mild version was topped with raw, chopped green onions. The hot one wasn't. In total, 98% of the people who got sick had eaten some dish containing green onions, compared to 69% of the people who stayed healthy. The pattern was too strong to be a coincidence. While the numbers confirmed the theory, the virus kept advancing inside the bodies of people who'd been exposed weeks earlier. The first symptoms were vague enough to be mistaken for a bad flu: low-grade fever, unusual fatigue, body aches, loss of appetite. Then came nausea and vomiting, followed by the disease's most telltale sign, urine turning dark, almost the color of strong tea, and skin and eyes taking on a visible yellow tint, what doctors called jaundice, a sign the liver was inflamed and struggling to function. A 14-year-old girl from the area, who had gone to the restaurant to celebrate a friend's birthday with a group of classmates, watched one of those friends go through exactly that sequence. First the fever and body aches, then the dark urine, then the yellow skin, and finally a sharp pain just below the ribs, as if she were being stabbed from the inside. For most healthy people, hepatitis A is a disease that passes within weeks, as unpleasant as it is. But for others, especially those with an already weakened liver, the inflammation progressed all the way to complete organ failure, and that's how 4 people ultimately lost their lives. With green onions confirmed as the vehicle for the virus, the next question was where they had come from and how they got contaminated in the first place. The FDA's investigation traced the source back to 3 farms in Mexico, which regularly supplied green onions to restaurants across the United States. According to the agency, the contamination likely happened somewhere between growing, harvesting, processing, or cooling the produce, possibly through contaminated water used for irrigation or washing, or through contact with infected workers during harvest. Inside the restaurant itself, the problem got even worse. The green onions arrived in boxes and were stored together with ice in a shared bucket for up to 5 days before being used. That meant a single contaminated batch had plenty of time to mix in with clean batches, spreading the virus through practically the entire stock used during those weeks. And Chi-Chi's wasn't an isolated case. Months earlier, similar outbreaks tied to raw green onions had already sickened around 250 people at restaurants in Tennessee, Georgia, and North Carolina, a pattern that should have raised the alarm sooner, but only drew national attention after the sheer scale of what happened in Pennsylvania. By the time the investigation wrapped up, the outbreak tied to the Chi-Chi's at Beaver Valley Mall added up to more than 650 confirmed cases of hepatitis A, 124 hospitalizations, and 4 deaths, making it one of the largest hepatitis A outbreaks ever linked to a single restaurant in the country. The impact on the company was immediate and permanent. Chi-Chi's had already been struggling financially and filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in October 2003, right in the middle of the outbreak. A court order issued in February 2004 allowed victims to pursue claims against the company despite its bankruptcy status. The brand never recovered. Within a year, fewer than half of its original locations remained open, and the last of them closed for good over the weekend of September 18, 2004. The case also left behind an important technical legacy. Alongside the other outbreaks from that same year, it reinforced, in the eyes of United States health authorities, the specific risks tied to importing fresh produce meant to be eaten raw, and helped shape stricter recommendations for how green onions and similar vegetables should be grown, processed, and handled before ever reaching a customer's plate. The Chi-Chi's case shows how a single ingredient, so ordinary that almost no one gives it a second thought, can become the starting point of a tragedy that crosses entire borders, from a farm field in Mexico to a family's dinner table in Pennsylvania. Stories like this deserve to be told carefully and accurately, without exaggeration, with respect for everyone who lived through it and everyone who lost someone in the process. That's the commitment of this channel, investigating real cases and bringing the facts with the seriousness they deserve. If this kind of content resonates with you, consider subscribing to follow the next investigations. And if you want to keep going right now, there's another documented real case in the video showing on screen.